Volume 2 of Classic Farm Machinery begins at the final plough-off of the 1972 British National Ploughing Championships. Although right-handed ploughs were, and still are, used at ploughing matches, most farmers had changed to reversible ploughing by the late 1960s. Some reckoned they were one-way ploughs, others described them as two-way ploughs, but no matter what they were called, ploughing started at one side of the field and finished at the opposite hedge. Tractors were mainly two-wheel drive until the end of the 1960s, but change was in the air. Four-wheel drive conversions, mainly by county and roadless, were already popular on large arable farms. The Doe 130, which replaced the Triple D, was one way of providing four-wheel drive during the 1960s and early 1970s. The Paramount conversion kit, which linked two tractors, retained the front wheels on the leading tractor. It was described by some as a four-man's Triple D, and it wasn't difficult to separate the tractors when the heavy work was done. Four-wheel drive options in 1970 included the 115 horsepower roadless 115 with its equal-sized wheels and the 67 horsepower four-wheel drive Sammy Leone with small front wheels. It had an air-cooled diesel engine and cost £1,995 ex-works. The articulated four-wheel drive 105 horsepower Massey Ferguson 1200 was launched in 1972. It was replaced by the 112 horsepower MF 1250 before production ceased in 1980. There were, and still are, some farmers who prefer crawler tractors. The main contenders in the early 1970s included the Fiat 70 with a trailed Ransom's plough, and the Marshall 70C. This model with a Ransom's mounted plough was one of the first crawler tractors to have three-point linkage. David Brown were one of the first manufacturers to comply with the new 1970 safety cab and frame regulations. All prototype cabs were given a severe test to make sure they were strong enough to meet the standards set by these regulations. During the early 1960s, some agricultural engineers came up with the idea of a driverless tractor. This design used a system of cables which could be buried in the soil, and the tractor steered itself with sensor heads attached to the bonnet. There were some obvious problems here. So, was remote control with radio signals the answer? A transmitter was used to steer the tractor, change gear, operate the hydraulic lift, even open the bonnet. But it couldn't top up the battery, and the tractor driver kept his job. Tractors with engines of 250 horsepower or more were made by several companies during the mid and late 70s. This American-built 335 horsepower Ford FW60 has a 225-gallon fuel tank. Caterpillar introduced the rubber-tracked 280 horsepower Challenger 65 to British farmers in 1989. More recent models include the 325 horsepower Challenger 75C and the 210 horsepower Challenger 35. Back in the late 1960s, tractor power had overtaken plough design. Reversible ploughs weren't always big enough to make full use of this newfound power. Some farmers went back to right-handed ploughs, like this 6-furrow Bamford plough on a BM Volvo tractor. Plough designers soon caught up, however, and this 5-furrow semi-mounted Lemken was a good load for the County 1124. With hydraulic linkages available for most crawlers by the early 1970s, they could be used with reversible ploughs, including this 4-furrow Ransom's and this 4-furrow Bonnell reversible with hydraulic turnover. An earlier model had a system of pulleys and wire ropes linked to the crawler drawbar, which reversed the plough when turning on the headland. A new name in plough manufacture had appeared in the late 60s. Warwickshire farmer Roger Dowdeswell couldn't find a suitable plough for his crawler, so he made one using Ransom's bodies. The mounted DP1, Dowdeswell Plough 1, soon had a stable mate in the shape of the semi-mounted DP2. The 215 horsepower John Deere 8430 seemed to have few problems with this 7-furrow Dowdeswell plough. Lemken and Ransom's reversible ploughs, including the TS84 on the John Deere 2120 and the 2-furrow Lemken on the Leyland 262, were popular ploughs for 60 to 80 horsepower tractors during the early and mid-1970s, when the 62 horsepower Leyland 262 cost £5,122. Dowdeswell ploughs were well established by the late 1970s. This Fiat 120 crawler is pulling a 5-furrow Dowdeswell DP2. Prices were on an upward spiral by 1977. The Fiat 120 crawler was close to £18,000. Like the County and roadless 4-wheel drive tractors, the Muir Hill 101 was based on a forward skid unit. The plough was a Ransom's TSR 106 reversible. By the late 1970s, right-handed ploughs were still used in some areas, but most farmers were finally converted to reversible ploughing. Furrow presses were used in the early days of tractor ploughing and didn't really disappear. By the early 1980s, it was becoming a common practice to hitch a furrow press to a reversible plough. In 1982, a front-mounted plough was considered a good way to counterbalance heavy rear-mounted ploughs. However, push-pull ploughs soon fell from favour. Matching the work of front and rear bodies wasn't easy, and they were a problem on narrow roads. Most tractors over 70 horsepower had 4-wheel drive by the late 80s, and by this time reversible ploughs had disc coulters only on the rear bodies. Some had none at all. Slatted mould boards, which improved soil movement on sticky soils, appeared in the early 90s. Slatted mould boards are also fitted to the Rabi plough on this Mercedes-Benz Unimog with electronic draft control and a fast tractor suspension system.